Greetings, everyone! It is a good day because today is my response to Zip's video on all the Rocksteady-inspired games that could be made on other DC heroes. Now, I came up with 4 characters, just so far, and just a couple of ideas, villains that I could bounce off of you guys. But I'm going to start with the big blue himself, Superman. Now I came up with a couple of ideas for Superman. And one of the ideas was that you start off the game as Clark Kent, going through the Daily Planet, You know, Titano ends up attacking. For those of you who don't know, Titano is a gigantic King Kong-like gorilla that shoots, kryptonite laser beams out its eyes. And he would be basically a tutorial boss. He'd be like the quote-unquote boss fight that gets you right straight in the game and really show you how epic Superman would be. I don't know how I would do the flight controls, but I would keep the free flow combat, showing off Superman's brawler side. And you could be able to switch between his powers and whatnot and what have you. And I would have literally almost nearly the whole of Metropolis. And you could visit Stryker's Island, you could visit Star Labs. I would make it a very accessible game. And the main plot, the main story that I come up with is that Lex Luthor is using this new brand of like Luthor technology. And Superman is very suspicious of this because LexCorp is developing all these highly advanced weapon systems and battle armors and what have you that he knows for a fact Lex could never create himself. So Clark gets very suspicious of this. And as the story progresses throughout the game, you come to find out that Lex Luthor has actually joined up and teamed with, no surprise, Brainiac, who gives him all this technology, and at the end you have this gigantic climactic battle in the Fortress of Solitude at the end, where you face Brainy Lex, as he's called. For those of you who have watched the Justice League cartoons, you'll know who I'm talking about. That's the guy that basically Flash, beat by accessing the Speed Force. For those of you that don't, just go on YouTube and type in, Flash epic moment or something, and you'll see what I'm talking about. That's who I want to be the final boss of this game. And I would of course leave it off for Brainiac to come back in sequels, but I'll get to that at the end of this segment. Now, the next boss fight that I want to have is of course Parasite, and Parasite was the first one I came up with. And this Action Comics cover that I have is one of the struggling sequences when Superman's struggling to fight off Parasite. I want to have the struggle sequence where Parasite can elongate his jaw and have it be almost like an homage to this cover, because I think that's pretty cool. And also I would make it to where Parasite looks pretty much like this action figure that you're going to see coming up, to where he looks like a beefy version of like 90s Eddie Brock as Venom, but he would have like the appearance of like the way he looks in DC Universe Online, and he would have like small tendrils and stuff. Basically, I would make Rudy Jones look like something out of a horror movie. He would look like Parasite in this game would look like a horror movie monster. And I think that it would be very appropriate, because Parasite is technically, a monster in his own right. Another character that I've thought of for a boss fight was John Corbin, the cyborg with the kryptonite core, Metallo. And he would basically trick Superman by pretending to rob a bank, and then you would have this big boss fight with him. And it would go in 3 stages. First time, he'd be in like his human fleshy form. Second time, as the battle gets on, he's a little more damaged. He'll look pretty much kind of like this. Just like half Terminator, half... Basically the way that Malcolm McDowell voiced him in the 90s Superman cartoon. That appearance of Metallo. And then the third fight, just him being like no synthetic flesh or anything, just straight metal. And I think that that could work, and I definitely think you could make Metallo very epic. You know, first time, not really too worried about the kryptonite poisoning. The next two fights, when he opens up his kryptonite core, yeah, you're gonna have to fight him from a distance. So that would make for a very interesting boss fight. I would put in side missions. Like one side mission, you team up with John Henry Irons to fight Bruno Mannheim and Intergang, and at the end of that, you actually have to fight because they're stealing Apocalyptian technology and using it. So you'll be fighting Apocalyptian, like battle-suited, like Intergang members, and then at the end you fight a heavily like Apocalyptian battle-armored Robert Dubois. Yes, I would put Bloodsport in this game. Just because, you know, I want to throw a couple of obscure characters. And speaking of obscure characters, here's one that Mount Vernon kid's gonna cringe at. Sorry, Chris, but I gotta put him in this game. But Mr. Mixius Pitalik. He would be this game's version of the Riddler. And he would just be, and I would actually have him be voiced by Guilford Godfrey again, just because I like the way Gilbert kind of portrayed him in the 90s cartoon as just being very campy and goofy and over the top. And that's all really he would be. He would just be more of like a campy, goofy character. I thought about having Ambush Bug in there, but I think Ambush Bug would just be like a random cameo in like the sequel game or something. Of course, I would add in, real quickly, before we get to the picture of Bizarro here, I would add in a couple of other obscure characters like Toy Man and Riot and Manchester Black, but they would be more like cameo and Easter egg stuff. Now, one that I kind of cut out that I may put in like a sequel is Bizarro. Like, I thought of a whole entire sequence where, like, there's a Star Labs breakout and you gotta fight Bizarro clones, and then you gotta face, you know, you gotta chase Bizarro through Metropolis while fighting him occasionally. And I would make him kind of like the way he looked in Superman Returns. I thought about making him look really deformed and fugly, but it wouldn't work out. It would look too really goofy, grotesque, and over the top. But characters that I would have in that would make a cameo but be in the sequel as boss fights, definitely. Of course, Livewire. Gotta have at least some female supporting villains. And I would also have, yes, Atomic Skull would be another villain that I would have in the sequel for Superman to fight. Other characters that I don't have pictures for that I would put as boss fights: Silver Banshee, potentially Mongol could be a boss fight. Could have, you know, him challenge Superman to a gladiator-esque battle, and they shoot down a war world battle arena in like the center of Metropolis. He would fight, and in the sequel, I would have Darkseid. I would actually have Darkseid as the main villain in the sequel. You would see, of course, Granny Goodness. You would possibly fight parts of the Female Furies. Calabac. Just, I came up with tons of ideas, and I realize that's very excessive and over the top. But it's like, you know, when I think of Superman, I think of just every cool villain that you would love to fight, and definitely a second to final boss fight before Darkseid in the sequel would be Doomsday. Yeah, that would be epic. But then I started pondering this thought before I end this segment. I'm going to give you this thought. In the third game, I thought about having Imperiex, but I came up with a plot twist just a couple of minutes ago. What if in the second game, Imperiex actually forced Superman to use Doomsday, and then they both combined to fight him, just like in that one comic book, if I remember correctly. But that's about it, guys. That's just a couple of ideas that I have for Superman. Now, we move on to the third member of the Trinity, and the only female among them. Yes, I will be talking about Diana Prince, the amazing Amazon. Yes, Wonder Woman. And I have a couple of ideas for Wonder Woman. And there's many obscure villains that Wonder Woman has. But with Wonder Woman, I would make her a combination of Batman and Catwoman in terms of free flow combat. She would be as graceful as a ballerina, but she'd be as hard hitting as Batman, if that makes any sense to some of you. Because that's the way I always picture Diana fighting. You know, she's got that fighting style. You would use the tiara as a projectile. You would when somebody goes to shoot you, you would use the bracelets. The bracelets to deflect bullets or energy blasts back at enemies. But I'll get into that a little bit more. Right now, I pretty much really missed my cue, but the very first boss fight that I would have at the beginning is Giganta. And you wouldn't face Giganta just once. You'd face her a couple of other times throughout the game. And I would make it a very, like, homage to God of War, you know, fighting those gigantic, massive enemies. I just think that would be an awesome way to kick off a Wonder Woman game. Start as Diana Prince, do the signature spin, you know, transform to Wonder Woman, then fight Giganta. It'd be cool. It'd be awesome. Another boss fight that I would have, and one that would be really trippy but cool, is Dr. Poison. And I would go with the second incarnation of this character, because she can secrete basically any chemical from her body. So you could have maybe possibly a sequence where she secretes like really like psychokinetic drugs or like chemicals at Wonder Woman. So it like disorients Wonder Woman, it poisons her, makes her see things. It would be kind of like a Scarecrow sequence, if you will, in its own right. Make, you know, Diana feel very warped. Another obscure villain, and it would be a pretty interesting boss fight, is Red Panzer. I think Red Panzer, considering that he has a gigantic cannon or grenade launcher-esque arm and has indestructible armor, that he would be a very tough boss fight, because you would have to try to dodge his cannon arm, but also you would have to take him down. You would have to hit him a couple of times before you take him down. Silver Swan. You could actually have a fight with her where you try to use a machinery or something to revert her psionic scream back at her. And then just when she's on the ground, you just gotta beat the crap out of her. And I would actually use the third version. It was Wonder Woman's friend who became like this cyborg, this brainwashed cyborg. So that would be my version of Silver Swan. Another obscure villain, I don't know how I would really utilize her, but I would definitely want her in the game, is Dr. Cyber. I think that would be a very cool Wonder Woman villain, and I would of course make her still vengeful. She would have her Doctor Doom inspired, you know, burnt ass face. And so she would still be, you know, blaming Diana for the scarring of her face. And some of you are going to give me crap for this next villain, but I would make him a badass in this game. And I think that he's really not as bad as people say, but Angleman. Yes, I would put Angleman in this game. I can hear some of you, and including possibly Rapperfest, just going, "Oh dear God, no." I would actually make him a badass, and I would really play up just how powerful the Angler really can be. Because he can transmute objects and teleport them and stuff, and so it would be a very interesting boss fight to try to utilize that against him. But another one that I really would want, and this is Wonder Woman's version of Scarecrow, is Dr. Siskel, I think is how you pronounce his last name. But yes, Dr. Psycho. You can make it like the Ra's al Ghul fight in Arkham City. Diana wouldn't be able to tell what's an illusion and what's real. It'd be a very trippy boss fight. And of course, yes, guilty pleasure, I would put Barbara Ann Minerva, the cheetah, in here. You can't have a Wonder Woman game, in my opinion, without having her fight the cheetah at least once. Although I would put Barbara Ann Minerva at least twice you would fight her. Although the second time she would be utilizing the power of the cheetah god, but I'm gonna get into that here towards the end. One character that I thought about adding, but I may end up saving her for the sequel, is Devastation. I think Devastation would be a really cool boss fight in a potential sequel. But then again, Rocksteady could probably find a way to make her fit. But one that I chose between her and Devastation on is Genocide. I think Genocide would be a great second to final boss fight before Ares and Circe, who would be the main villains of the game. And the plot line to get into that, guys, is that basically Ares is trying to harness the power of all the pantheonal gods and the titans and basically every god energy in the world, and Circe helps him, plot and deceive the gods into giving him that power. And so you would have a boss fight with Ares, who's just about ready to harness this power. However, we find out that Circe, being the goddess of lies, betrays him right after you beat him in combat and calls him useless and that she used him as a pawn. And so the final fight of the game, you face a pantheonal empowered Circe. Yeah, I know that seems kind of crap, but it could also have the potential to be epic as well. And it would fit in line with the fact that Circe believes that magic should be wielded by the gods, and that she should be and that everyone should bow down and kiss her ass. All in all, those are just a few ideas that I have for Wonder Woman and just a basic plot synopsis. So that's pretty much it on that, guys. Now we move on to a character that more than likely Rocksteady could actually make cool again, and that is DC's version of Robin Hood. Yes, Oliver Queen, the Green Arrow. Green Arrow would definitely be an awesome character, and you could definitely actually play up, his bow being kind of a gadget in itself. Like, I thought about using a grapple line from his bow that he can zip up buildings, and maybe a whole entire zip line arrow that he could use to glide between buildings and use it as almost as I'll describe that later. But anyway, yes, I would also put Black Canary in here. Much like Catwoman, she would have her own story, her own subplot within the game. And she would be doing these murder investigations, and come to find out that the final boss of her story would in fact be Lady Shiva. And so I would have this big epic kung fu battle between Black Canary and Lady Shiva. Anyway, yeah, getting back to what I was saying. Yeah, he could zip between buildings and use his bow as kind of a zip line, if you will. But anyway, as you can see here by this picture, definitely one that I would put is Count Vertigo. And with Count Vertigo's fight, he would massively disorient you, and you'd have to fight a whole bunch of henchmen while disoriented. So that would be a pretty epic thing for Count Vertigo, really playing into his hypnotic powers of sorts. Clock King would be a cameo in this game, as well as Red Dart, the Rainbow Archer, and a few other obscure Green Arrow-esque villains. And maybe possibly do a side mission that would involve Clock King. I haven't quite decided that yet. You would have the Crime Lord Brick. Brick, I think, would be a great side mission. Either that or he could play somewhat of a pivotal role in the story, where he knows who this master planner and assassin is that he paid to help try to wipe out Green Arrow and many others. However, you would actually fight his paid bodyguard and personal assassin. Yes, Constantine, the Greek assassin, Constantine Drakon. Who, in my opinion, is probably one of Ollie's more formidable foes, aside from Merlin and Deathstroke. And with Constantine, he could actually pluck your arrows out of the air, so you gotta try to surprise him with special arrow attacks. 'Cause this guy's reflexes are retardedly fast, and I hope to do a not a lesser known, but a Supervillains Explored on him. And Merlin the Magnificent. You could have now this guy would actually this guy, the way that I would do a boss fight with Merlin is that it would basically be an arch off. Like literally you gotta match, Merlin move for move, arrow for arrow, and try to actually outmaneuver and outsmart him. That's pretty much how I would do Merlin's boss fight. And then Merlin finally spills the beans on who the main baddie of the game is, and yes, it would in fact be Slade Wilson, aka Deathstroke. And with Deathstroke, you'll get into like a sword fight with him, you'll get into like a fist fight with him, you'll get to do like a range, like distance fight with him where you gotta use your arrows versus his guns. It would just pretty much be one of the most epic battles that Rocksteady could probably create. If they did it, of course. And with Oliver Queen, with Green Arrow, I think that he's a very kind of underrated character. A lot of people don't like him because, he's a guy who uses a bow and arrow. Who fights crime with a bow and arrow? I guarantee if Rocksteady got their hands on Green Arrow, they would actually make him just as epic and would reinvent the character as they did with Batman. But that is it for Green Arrow. We move on to the fourth and final character. Yes, I will be talking about the Flash. And I would include, of course, Jay Garrick. I would include Wally West in his Speed Force uniform. I would include Bart Allen as Kid Flash, and I would use Wally's daughter as the second impulse as like the characters in the game. All in all, I would definitely not make it like Sonic, but I would make it a very, very fast-paced game, and you would have all of Keystone City to run around. Villain-wise, I would add obscure villains like, of course, this guy, the Turtle, who can use technology to slow the Flash down. I think what would be great is if you could find a way to actually reverse that technology onto the Turtle, or find a way to get past it and end up like surprising him and junk. And there would be many, many other Flash villains, but I cannot think of most of the really obscure ones right now. But I would, of course, like many of the other games I've listed here, throw quite a few obscure villains in there. I'm not sure if I would have Murmur in here as a cameo, just because he seems a little bit kind of like a dark character, but knowing Rocksteady, they put Zaz in there. I have no doubt they did Flash that they would put Murmur in there. Tar Pit would definitely be kind of a Clayface / Solomon Grundy, just like a big, massive, hulking character that they could use. I think that is definitely a character that has the potential to really, really actually be fun to fight against. And another character, one that I really want to see the Flash go up against, and I think his boss fight would be pretty cool, is the Shade. Yes, and the way that you fight the Shade is that he covers the room in darkness, and so you gotta basically like cut through his Shadow Force powers with like highly intense like ultraviolet light. So you gotta like shoot these spotlights straight at him, blinding him. And when you blind him, you got only a couple of seconds to just like, pummel on him. And then rinse, lather, repeat until you beat him. But of course, no Flash game can be created without having some iteration of the Rogues. And the Rogues that I would put in this game is Captain Cold, Captain Boomerang, Mirror Master, Weather Wizard, and Heat Wave. In potential sequels, we would see Dr. Alchemy, Blue Cobalt, and a few others, or Cobalt Blue, and a few others. Now, would Zoom be part of the Rogues? No, Zoom would be his own separate villain, but maybe in a sequel he would ally and team himself with the Rogues. But getting back to what I was saying before we get to the picture of Grodd here, I would make it to where it's like very fast paced. You can run all throughout Keystone City. You can grind on power lines or stuff like that. Like I would definitely play up, Barry Allen's speed in the game. And he would be able to phase through walls, but he would learn that ability later. And of course, no game is complete without Grodd, and Grodd would be the main villain simply because he would be using this like facility, this great facility that Keystone City needs, this new medical facility. And it would be a cover for him kidnapping people and devolving them, and then when Barry finds this out, Grodd initiates, his invasion, and so basically towards the end of the game, you have to fight this massive, like, devolution campaign and this, like, guerrilla invasion. Now, that's probably the lamest story that I've come up with, but that's about really all I can come up with in terms of the Flash, at least, on short notice. But for the most part, guys, and I did not talk, and since this is right near the end of the video, I'm going to just talk about the stuff that I did not get to talk about. You would visit Themyscira and Wonder Woman. You would get to fight alongside Steel. You would get to go to the Steel Works. There would be you would, in the Fortress of Solitude, see a giant display case with a battle-damaged and disabled Solaris. You would get to walk around the fortress and see all the different wings. For Flash, you would get to go to Jay Garrick's lab and see the Cosmic Treadmill. You would get to go to Themyscira, possibly see a reference to the Invisible Plane in Wonder Woman. And for Green Arrow, I would put a massive reference, if not an entry, to the Arrow Cave. So that's my ideas, guys. Enjoy.